In this episode, you'll learn how to win your divorce without ever stepping into a courtroom.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life.
This week, we had Tracy Gould-Shinen on the show, and we had a great conversation about what mediation is, how mediation can offer a peaceful divorce resolution, and how to prepare for mediation. I hope this episode is valuable to anyone who might be listening. Stay tuned for the full episode. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, Tracy Gould-Shinen is joining us. Tracy is a mediator, conflict coach, and parent coordinator at Clarity Mediation. She specializes in assisting people work through complicated and emotional issues to reach a fair, thorough, and satisfactory resolution. Today, Tracy and I will be discussing what mediation is, how mediation can offer a peaceful divorce resolution, and how to prepare for mediation. Welcome, Tracy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So great to have you. Excited to talk about this today. As we get into it, Tracy, for our listeners, would you just share a little bit about your background and qualifications, how you got to where you are today as a mediator?
Sure, yeah. So in the early 90s, I was fresh out of college and I was invited to a training on conflict management, which at the time meant nothing to me. I knew what conflict was, I knew what management was, but as a thing, I didn't know. But I was intrigued and I went and I was hooked. I thought it was brilliant. And then the same group was offering a training like the next weekend on mediation. Same, I'd maybe heard of it, but I really didn't know what it was. Sort of didn't have anything else to do, so I said, sure. And then I was really hooked. The idea that there was this structure out there that people could use to resolve their differences just really resonated with me. And so from there, I just kept seeking opportunities. There weren't that many in Columbia, South Carolina in the 90s, but I did get with a group that was building a community mediation center from the ground up. And I got in on that, worked with them for a couple of years. And then when it was time to hire the first executive director, I put my hat in the ring and was gratefully chosen. So I got to really dive in. And since then, since 99, I've considered myself a full-time mediator.
Now, you have a master's in peace studies?
Yes.
With a focus on conflict resolution. That is really interesting. Please tell me more about that.
Yeah, so that was coming about at the same time I was getting interested in mediation. And I started with the master's in peace studies thinking globally, like I might go do something international. I didn't even know what yet. And then the more I got into mediation, the smaller I got into interpersonal disputes, interpersonal conflict. And that's where I really ended up focusing my work. Yeah.
That is fascinating. Now, for our listeners who maybe have not heard our previous shows or don't have the experience with it, could you tell them what mediation is?
Yeah, sure. So it's a process where you discuss issues that you're not quite in agreement with yet, or maybe not at all. The mediator is there to help facilitate the conversation. The mediator is neutral. They don't take sides. They don't tell you what to do or make decisions for you. They can share information, financial, legal, any kind of information they happen to know, but they cannot give advice. So nice and neutral. And then the other thing that's great about it is it's confidential. So it's a private conversation with a neutral party to help you figure things out and come to agreement.
Now, do you mediate only on divorce and family law issues?
Mostly family issues, mostly divorce. Sometimes I'll mediate a family issue like with adult siblings. That's always interesting. And then every once in a while, I'll have a civil matter like a personal injury, but those are kind of few and far between. And then every once in a while, I get to facilitate a group setting, like a nonprofit board or something like that. So I like to mix it up sometimes.
Now, and you're doing this is this in Georgia? Is that correct?
Yes, I'm in Atlanta. Yeah.
In Atlanta. So in Atlanta and Georgia, is mediation mandatory for divorce cases?
It is. Yeah. In most of Georgia, yeah, it sure is.
And it's that way in Florida as well. But I've learned through doing this podcast and speaking with attorneys all over the country, that is not the case.
Yeah.
In many states. And so it's completely voluntary, but here it's court ordered or required by the court. In the cases that you mediate, what makes it a little different, say, than somebody else's mediation? Kind of, how do you differentiate what you do for people?
So I really do two streams of mediation. So I do work with the courts, and those folks have all been ordered to mediate. And some are happy to be there. Some really don't want to be there. So you get this real mix of types of folks and where they are in the process. And so that's always interesting, keeps me on my toes. And then I also do private mediations, and most of those are self-selecting. These are folks that want to resolve their divorce amicably, privately, without litigation. They really want to get it done on the front end as kindly as possible. And they're very different processes, right? The court wins are sort of short and sweet or not sweet. And it's kind of one and done with the court cases. With the private cases, we've got more room and flexibility to take our time and bring in other professionals as needed. So it's a bit more civilized.
Yeah, and I think generally mediation, even though, let me ask this, I guess. So do you do mediations where the parties have lawyers as well?
Yes.
And that's where, for our listeners, that's what we do a lot. Obviously, we have to go to mediation. So it's really a great opportunity to resolve your case and really have more input than you will if a judge makes the decision. And, I think it can be difficult just because it's a long day. We do here, we just knock it out in one day. Sometimes two. Sometimes we need two. But, I've talked to other mediators, and they do a process where they're meeting with the couples, maybe every once a month or every couple weeks. And I find that fascinating. Do you do that as well?
I do. So with my private cases that are pro se, which means they don't have attorneys, exactly my process. We take our time. We move as fast or slow as we need to. We meet for 2 hours, and then another couple of weeks or a month, another 2 hours. And the space in between is used for research, talking to professionals, emotional processing. And then sometimes when attorneys are involved and they bring me into the case, those are the all-dayers where, like you said, knock it out in a day. So I see both. And there's benefits to both.
And I wonder, why don't we as the attorneys and the mediators do it in that different way?
Yeah.
For some cases that may be more appropriate. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting exploration for folks, I think, to go from one style to the other. It definitely there's more engagement because you're involved longer in that way.
Right.
Now, attorneys, of course, you're involved with your clients for a long time already, but the agreement comes farther down the road rather than in that day.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it makes for a better agreement because people have had the time to really thoroughly think about issues and research them. And then sometimes it works well to just knock it out in a day too.
Yeah. I just find it interesting because I see the pros and cons with both. And so from the attorney side, we're ready. We have been prepared. We've got all the financials, we're ready on the mediation day. But of course, we're not emotionally attached to the decision. So for us, it's been, it's very standard, right? And we're used to when, it's going through. Whereas the client, sometimes that 8-10 hour day is overwhelming to then sign an agreement at the end, no matter how much we've prepared them for it.
Yeah. And the emotional divorce, so in the divorce, you've got this business side and then the emotional side.
Mm-hmm.
And the emotional side just takes longer often.
Yeah.
They run next to each other. But let's say somebody is really attached to the marital home. They really want to keep it. The attorneys and even the mediator and maybe the other party realize they can't afford it. And so sometimes it takes a while for them to really sit and think about it, look at the numbers, and get okay with the fact that they maybe can't afford it and be able to release that hold on that picture they've got in their mind. That can come with time. Whereas pounding out in a day, it might not lead to agreement because they're so stuck on their position. I have to have the house, and they don't see the reality outside of it.
And I think that I know is, there is a time in most cases when it is really, we use the word ripe for mediation. It's time. And that's part of it. Why, you need some time so that the clients, not that necessarily they are a little bit more emotionally prepared, but you've had time to discuss, with their lawyer over that, because the emotions are really what keep deals from happening on both sides most of the time. Because if they were able to rationally assess and evaluate on both sides, right? We represent the women, but like sometimes the men are just, they can't accept it.
Sure.
And it does prevent a lot of, agreement at mediation, and which is frustrating for clients, because they're like, we just spent all this time and money and, not being able to reach it. But it's important. I mean, they are emotions. It's your life, your kids, your money, your future. Of course, to say you're emotional, I think that, of course you are. Like you would be like, I'm not going to say a psychopath if you weren't, but kind of like sociopath, whatever. Like you would just be like completely devoid of feelings. Of course, there's going to be feelings attached. It's just like, are they preventing you from making a decision or not? And I do think that just for our listeners, I think, and I love your thoughts on it, is one of the best things about mediation, because you can voice your feelings, your emotion. And I have found in my experience, good mediators allow the clients to get that out because, they're not going to be heard in the court on most of what they want to say. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the beauties of mediation, is that we allow the space for the emotional side to a certain extent. We can't be there, but I think it's a part of the process. Like, how do you feel about this? And if they're coming out of a marriage, especially a long one, they're thinking about all this history and where it's gone, and to make those rational decisions is really hard. So to be able to have their story heard by a mediator, even if it doesn't really directly affect the agreement, they just need to say it. It's very valuable. And then they get more in an emotional place that they can make decisions. And there just isn't space for that in the courtroom. It's not made for that. But in mediation, you can go there for a little bit.
I think so. Like, you're right, within reason, but it's just an opportunity where I think our clients, they know we're on their side as their attorneys, and they've told us, but yet the need to be heard and seen by somebody else, even though you're not the ultimate decision maker, you're helping facilitate that process. So I think our clients really do look to the mediator as if you're making the decisions, which we know you're not, but they know you're helping them get there. So It's almost like, I don't know if, would you agree, like an authority figure, but certainly when you've been appointed by the courts, yes, to some extent, even though you certainly don't make anybody do anything, and you just help them get there.
Yeah.
But do you think that, like, they feel like you're listening to them just creates a comfort level, and maybe then they can move on?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this almost immediate trust that can be there, which is fascinating because we just met, right? Like in this court case, we just met, don't know each other at all. And you're about to tell me some very intimate, personal, vulnerable things about your life, about what you want, don't want, about your kids. And so I have to really be that genuinely for them so they feel comfortable enough to be able to explore the issues in a way that they feel that support. And then you're right, sometimes they do look to me like an authority figure, and in a way I am, because I'm controlling the process. But often, I'll find myself reminding them, like, hey, you don't have to convince me of anything. I am not making this decision for you. I'm not the judge here. This is, and I remind them, you have the power. This is your decision-making process, which makes people feel good to know, oh yeah, okay, you're not taking that from me. I do have that.
Yes. And, and I think it's, as we've been in this area for long enough, and generally, it's even if it's not their first divorce, but it's, in that case, we, can advise, like, this really is so much better for you if not to just, cave and agree to everything, but to really meet in the middle, ideally, and come up with your own agreement rather than the courts. And sometimes, right, in Georgia, you guys have juries in divorces. Is that still true?
Yes.
That's insane. Like, I think that would be so fun on one level, but then really scary on another.
You don't know the folks that are judging you.
No. You don't know. And I do think I need to put that on my list. Like, I think I got to go watch one in a Georgia courtroom, just see how it plays out, because I'm fascinated. I'm a law junkie like that, But like, that's a lot of decision making that now is no longer in your control. And most of us, whether you don't have to be a control freak, I think, to think, no, I do want to be in charge of decisions that affect my money, my children, my future. I think that's the biggest selling point for mediation.
Yeah, it really can be. I find sometimes folks have a hard time grasping that.
Yeah.
They can't understand, they don't get it, that no, you really get to make the decision here. They're still trying to convince me, or sometimes the court cases really don't want to mediate. They just want to take it to the judge.
Yes.
They want that authority figure to make the decision for them. But to your point, what often probably happens is they get a decision that they're not as happy with as if they had held on to that and used mediation to their advantage. Even if it's a compromise, it's still going to be more specific to your life than what a judge can do. They just don't have the time to get to know you that well. And they're going to go pretty standard on stuff most of the time that may not work for you. So, yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. And I would imagine through your many years of practice, and of course, every family and individual is different. However, we see a lot of the same patterns. And the more experience you have really great creative ideas to help people achieve their goals. And that creativity, it may happen in our arguments in the courtroom, but the judges don't have a whole lot of room for creativity.
Right. And that's what I meant earlier. One of the things when I said information, I can share with folks, here are things I've seen folks do that work well.
Yeah.
Here's some things I've seen folks do that don't work well. So there are examples of, what other people have done that you can follow or learn from. Still, you choose the direction you want to go in, but here are some ideas, and that can help get their juices flowing.
Well, and it does, because if you've never been there, you might not think this is an option. You just don't know, right? It's just black and white. If it's 50-50, it's got to be week on, week off. Right. This is the way it has to be. And we have to split things in this manner. And it's like, it doesn't have to be so cookie cutter when you're in the process. Now, this is an interesting thing that I'd love for our listeners to hear, because of the way when you do it, say, with just the individuals. And I mean, not that they couldn't have attorneys, but generally they don't when they're kind of doing that longer process where you meet for a few hours. Have you had situations where you have children, and you say, why don't you guys try this? And then we'll come back in a month and see how it's working before it's reduced to a final agreement.
Yeah, absolutely. When I have the clients that really fit that kind of mold to try that, I love that, especially if they're freshly separated. That's brand new to them and brand new to the kids. Everybody's getting used to new stuff. It seems almost illogical to plop down a permanent parenting plan when you don't even know what it's really going to be like yet. So when that is an opportunity, it's fantastic. Well, try this. Let's come back, talk about it, see what you want to tweak. Yeah, it's a good one.
And unfortunately, even in our practice, you would think, because it seems so logical, call the other attorney, why don't we try this before mediation just to see if it works? And so often, and it, whether it's the attorney, we're not in the situation of we're collaborating because to see if something will work. And so then if we go to the court and try to get a temporary order, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so you have to just do the best you can, especially on the parenting plan. I think that's where there can be so much room to be creative and do what works best for your family if you're both willing to try that.
That's the key, if both are willing to try it. And I know some folks are nervous about doing a little trial because they fear it's going to set precedent in a way they can't go back and change it. So when there's not good trust, a good level of trust that we can come to the table and renegotiate everything, they're scared to try something like that. And courts are built on precedent. And so attorneys work that way too. So it makes sense that
It does.
it doesn't happen, but it would be beautiful if it did.
Yes. And there tends to be in a divorce often, right? Already a lack of trust, lack of good communication. So sometimes that is difficult.
Yeah.
That's more ideal and does require trust. Because yes, we as lawyers will be like, well, they've been doing this for 6 months. So keep doing it. Now, at what point is a situation too high conflict to successfully mediate in your experience?
Right. Initially, the first red flag would be if they refuse to mediate, right? Either they don't make the appointment or they keep skirting making the appointment. And then with the court cases, sometimes folks will show up, reject every proposal made and have no decent proposals of their own, just maybe completely outrageous ideas. You can tell they're just really trying to sink it. So that's too high conflict. Another example might be when everybody's trying to mediate well and in good faith, but the power dynamic is so huge different. And as a mediator, I can see it. This person is really driving the conversation and this one is really just accommodating. And okay, all right, I guess. When I see that going on too much, I would stop the mediation. I would want to at least slow it down to give the less powerful party time to really think about that dynamic. And I'll say, it seems like this is what's going on. Am I right? Am I wrong? How are you feeling about this? And give them a chance to have their own voice in this. If in that conversation they say, yeah, I don't feel like I have any say here, well, then we're not going to keep going. Yeah. You've got to feel at least confident enough to have a say. So yeah, fortunately that I don't see that as much anymore as I used to. Mediation maybe has just gotten, I don't know what else changed, but mediation is so common now that
yes,
it seems to work well most of the time.
I think so. And hopefully, women who recognize that, well, and I say women just because we represent women only, and we see that a lot, and there is the power dynamic, and that's what we tell them. That's why you have us. So we can tell you this is good, this is consistent with the law, this is a good deal for you, or this is not, right? So we're like, my husband's offered blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, let's see, is it really based on what you're entitled to, a good deal for you or not? And I think that, in those situations that helps because then women, because you can't advise them and be on either side. So I'm certain when you see that, it does make you wonder, are they really, voluntarily going into this agreement?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what do you, tell your clients to bring or to prepare for mediation? How do they do that? Let's say a couple says, okay, we want to go see Tracy. We want to work this out. And what do you tell them to help them be most prepared?
So a couple of things. One, ask them, I sort of say have them, I ask them to go through their finances and pull together what they earn, what they spend, what their assets are, what their debts are, to get that all on paper or uploaded online, however comfortable they are with tech. And so we can all look at the same information and ask each other questions. So that I get that started early because sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes people are on it, but a lot of times people have to really pull it together. And so that's one of the first pieces of homework. I also talk to them about being prepared to compromise, that, as amicable as this might be, it is still a negotiation. And so I want you to think about it in terms of like a kind negotiation where you're going to say, and I want you to think ahead of time, what's really important to you? What are your priorities? What do you have to have? What do you want, but you could live without? What do you not care about? Kind of categorize the things, all the things, whether it's money, house, dog, kids, decision making, so that you go in with some idea of all that. And then we can compare the two of you, where you are on these things, and what's important to you might not be important to them. Beautiful. So I try to help them with their mindset, with the negotiation ideas and the facts. What do you have? And then with the kids, let's be realistic. What are their schedules? What are their ages? What are y'all's work schedules? How far apart do you live? And coming up with what's going to make the most sense for everybody, and kind of just plant some seed. Around the parenting plan, it's a lot of planting seeds to think about these things. It's less firm than money, right? Those are some of the things I touch on.
Well, and I think that's important, because we've talked about parenting plans on the show certainly before, because they are required. And for our listeners, like you just made probably, if you've never been through it or have exposure, you have no idea how detailed they are. And we're talking about all the holidays with the school, the summer schedule, different vacations, and so many things that take a lot of time just to absorb. Oh my gosh, I've got to make so many decisions that I never had to think about before because we did them one way or the other. We just did things, and so now it's going to be different.
Yeah. And when I say, okay, so you all exchange on Friday, what time? After school. Okay, what time does school get out? 2:30. So do you pick up at school? No, it's usually after school. So we have to get down to exactly what time. And we can build a grace period. We can have a backup plan, but we need the exact time and the exact location. If it's at school release, great. But what when school's not in session? What's the backup time there? And I don't know. So
there's a lot. And now let's talk a little bit about, for our listeners, like how would you advise them to choose on, what is most important to them, and what's okay to compromise on?
Right. So it's so individual. You said like every person is different. Every family dynamic is unique. So helping them figure out what's important to them is a part of the process. And they don't always know when they're heading into mediation. So, it's a positions and interests thing, right? I want the house. Okay, that's your position. Talk to me about why that's important to you. What does that mean to you? And so we can go into the bigger picture of the values, is it the memories? Is it your future? And then the reality testing, can you afford it? And really try to ask questions around why they think that might be important to them. But then the mediator's role also is to bring up things maybe they haven't thought about. What about the other assets? What about this debt? What about that car? What about the dog?
Yeah.
They might think, well, gosh, I didn't even really think about that. I just figured, it would get figured out. And so, yeah, if I have the opportunity ahead of time, I encourage them to think about their priorities and why it's important to them, not just the what, but the why.
Yeah.
And then in the process, continue that.
Now, what about in cases where there have been allegations of domestic violence? Are you able to mediate those kinds of situations, like without attorneys?
Yes, we can mediate the issues around the divorce,
Okay.
right? So the parenting time, the money stuff. We don't mediate the actual abuse or allegations of abuse. We don't go back. We can't mediate the past on anything.
Yeah.
And particularly abuse. So if it comes up, we screen. We screen for the courts. I screen privately. And sometimes people don't tell you, but then you can kind of pick up on something's going on there. But if, let's say it's out in the open, that there's been a history of violence, then we talk carefully about exchanging of the children. So that is the time that we see the most incidents of conflict, but particularly violence also is at the exchange of children on that Friday after school at the Kroger. And so how are we going to do that so that everybody's safe? I don't want you hurt. I don't want you going to jail. How do we do this safely? Is there a neutral spot? Can you just do it at school? So, I'll talk about the things that they're scared to talk about and try to sort of normalize it because it's already happened, and just say, this is what, if there's been criminal accusations, if there's been arrests, if there's been protective orders, we're going to talk about it out in the open. If it's covert, a little more subtle, I just might need to be a little bit more delicate. And maybe I'll talk with the potential victim privately and ask them, if what I'm picking up is what's going on and what do they need to feel safe, including continuing mediation. Does this process feel safe to you?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, do you want to stay separate? We can mediate separately. Or are you okay being in the same room? Those kinds of things. Yeah, we can talk about that.
And that is good to know. And I think that's a good option too, because sometimes mediation can be very successful just if you're separate, just because then you can speak maybe a little bit more freely. And, as doing this, certain things that one spouse may say may really trigger the other and create a response that if they're separate, talking freely to you, they don't hear, right? Because when you are mediating and delivering some of the information or negotiating, telling them what the other person wants, it doesn't come with the emotion that if their spouse was saying it sometimes. So I think probably it really helps in a lot of cases.
Yeah, it can really take the heat down.
Yeah.
And if there has been violence or, there is that power dynamic differential I mentioned before, doing it separate is exactly that. I can bring back to the party only what needs to be shared. Like, here's their proposal.
Yeah.
And I can leave out the nasty things they said in the other room. We don't need to keep going with that. We'll leave that there.
Right.
Or even how they said it. I can, we can boil it down to the nugget of information that I take over to them so they can hear it in a very neutral way and be able to think about their response without being triggered.
Now, what would you advise to someone, who maybe is going through mediation, but they feel like they aren't getting a good outcome? They're just feeling like this is not working for me.
Yeah, so that happens. And if I sense somebody is disengaging, I'll check it one-on-one. If somebody outright says, this isn't working for me, which has happened, I can say, I hear you. Let's talk about it a little bit more. What do you need to have it work better for you? What's missing here? And if they really don't like it at all, they don't think it's worth it at all, they can quit anytime. Mediation is voluntary, even when it's court ordered. You're ordered to go to mediation, but once you get there, it's completely up to you how you handle it. You stay in the room and you negotiate, great. You negotiate a little bit, you think it stinks, you're out. Okay, it's your call. So I'm not gonna make anybody stay, but I do talk to them about the pros and cons of leaving or staying, what their next steps might be, just to help them process their decisions so they make a wise one. But ultimately, it's up to them.
Yeah. Now, in mediation does offer more privacy than a trial. And, tell our listeners a little bit why that's important.
It goes back to what we were talking about on the emotion side. So when you're in dispute with somebody, when you're in a disagreement with somebody, you're revealing how you think and feel about something. Could be anything. When it's a divorce or a family matter, it goes much deeper than that. And so to even be there, but then to talk about it, you're being very vulnerable. And that's scary. So, and courtrooms are intimidating. And so with the privacy of mediation, folks can be vulnerable. They can express their emotions and not in a public setting. If we're in a caucus, which is just the mediator and the party, it's just us. Like, go ahead and cry, call them all the names you want. Perfectly fine. And then we'll talk through the issue, and that's what I'll take over to him. You can't do that in a courtroom. And the issues are so private. You're talking about how you parent. You're talking about your debt that you're embarrassed about, or how little you earn or something like that. And it's confidential. It's just us. They feel, hopefully, that it's easier to talk about that stuff in a private setting, which can really get us better at agreement.
Yeah. And I really think, a lot of times maybe we don't stress that as much, but having that privacy, that confidentiality to work all of this out is worth a lot. And especially, just like you said, to say that in a courtroom, with strangers, a judge, the other side, the other attorney, court reporter, bailiff, and then getting interrupted by the attorney, objection, and all these things. Like, it doesn't look as well. I mean, it was certainly not as glamorous as anything on, TV, but it does. You are very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And to avoid that is worth a lot. And that's where I think it's important for, people to understand, like, if you're compromising, just understand that, these things that are important to you and what you're getting and what maybe you're avoiding as well. We try to talk to our clients about that. Like, look at mediation. And if you get something in an agreement that you'll never get in the court, like that's a big deal, right? The judge just isn't going to do that. But your spouse, you may be able to finagle something, and they may agree to you always getting one holiday or something. Like, that can be really important.
Yes.
And seem very, very important in the midst of a divorce, right? With children.
Everything's heightened.
It is. It so much is. And I think that's why it is important to understand for our listeners, mediators know that, right? You understand that emotion, not to make it certainly a crying fest or all these emotions, but just the empathy and the ability to hold space for somebody when they're going through it is just much better than in the courtroom. There's just not going to be that time. I mean, the judges they do the best they can. They may be like, do you need a tissue? But it's like, we got to get going, right? Like, we got 4 hours and that's it. And so.
Yeah.
it can feel definitely much less. It certainly doesn't feel very supportive. I don't think that's the nature of our court system. They're there to make a decision and hear the evidence. So,
and ultimately, it's the dissolution of a marriage contract. It's a real business-minded process.
Yes.
Really looking at the money and the kids in a really emotionless way. Not emotionless if it's your life, but that's how the court has to do it. And it is the dissolution of a contract, which people don't really realize. They think they're going to, get their day in court to hear that I'm going to tell this story and the judge is going to be blown away at how awful they were in my marriage. And I'm like, no, they don't, not that they don't care, but they don't have the time for that.
Tracy, before we go, what a great conversation. I can't believe we are practically out of time. I so appreciate you today, but can you impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience throughout your career and experience?
Yes. So women, as we all know, historically have not had the power in the marriage. They historically have not been the ones in control of the money, maybe not even any input on the money. And I am seeing that change, which is having a ripple effect in other areas of their lives and in society. So women historically are also home with the kids, or definitely the moms, which is a huge job, undervalued. And not that dads aren't awesome, and I appreciate men. This is not a knock on men, just speaking again how we've seen things in the past and as they're changing. I'm seeing women make their own money and be more and more the controller of the money in the house, so they know what's going on. They're at less of a disadvantage when it comes to talking about stuff and negotiating it. So I'm 54. So the generation above me, very much classic historical dynamic. My generation, it's a mix. Some of us are learning it now in our 40s and 50s. The generation below me, I'm seeing that, these women feel free to speak their mind. They are confident in what they want. They don't fear the repercussions in the same way that our grandmothers did.
Right.
There's less meekness. There's more boldness. And it's beautiful because now everybody can be at the same playing field talking about the same things without that power dynamic. Yeah.
Well, and I agree that's such a good trend that we're seeing for sure. And lastly, Tracy, where can our listeners find you for more information and resources?
Yeah, so my website is claritymediation.net, and on there's some information. There's also a link to schedule for free consultations. I'm happy to talk to anybody who's seeking possible mediation for divorce. We can talk through what all that looks like. And then my email is tracy@claritymediation.net.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. We've reached the end of our show today, and thank you to Tracy Gould-Shinen for joining us to discuss what mediation is, how mediation can offer a peaceful divorce resolution, and how to prepare for mediation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was great. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Listeners, if you or someone you know in the Northeast Florida area is going through or even thinking about divorce, you're not alone. Taking that first step can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Our newsletter is filled with actionable advice tailored to guide you through this process. By signing up, you'll gain the tools to face the unknown with courage and see if we're the right fit to support you during this life-changing time. Don't wait. Click the link in the show notes, fill out the form, and take the first step toward building a brighter future today.